To add such a guard, we can run ionic generate again, and there in the dropdown, we also have a guard. So let's select guard here, and now the path will be in the auth folder, and then I will name it auth guard. Now, there's a lot of auths in here, but the name just makes sense because we're checking the authentication status. But this now gave me that new auth guard TS file here, and the testing file which I'll get rid of. So the auth guard TS file here implements can activate as a default. Now, in case you don't know how guards work in Angular, guards are in the end also just services, which is why this is also provided in root. But guards can then be added to routes. We can attach them to a route, and then, depending on how we attach it, a method defined in that guard, like can activate, is executed. And only if it returns true, the navigation is allowed and the user may go where he wanted to go. Now, I want to add that auth guard in my app routing module to places and bookings, to these two routes. Since we lazy load our content here, can activate is actually the wrong guard, because that would mean that the code for the lazy loaded module gets downloaded before the guard actually executes. And that means if we prevent the navigation, we downloaded the code for nothing. So instead, we should use can load, which actually is a guard that runs before lazy loaded code is fetched. Now we don't need to implement can activate here, but the can load method, and you can press Command or on Windows Control and click on can load to go to the definition of that. And there you see how the can load method should look like. So you can just copy that from there and move that into your auth guard. And now you just need to import all the things it requires here. The light bulb here helps you with that. If you click on what's missing and then on the light bulb, you can simply add all these imports. And at the end, you must not have a semicolon, but opening and closing curly braces, because this is a method definition here. Now you can get rid of all the imports which are not required. And now in here, we're getting an error because in the guard, we need to return a Boolean, true or false, or a promise that eventually resolves to a Boolean, or an observable that eventually yields a Boolean. We'll use an observable later in the course. For now, I will just return true or false, but of course I don't want to hard code it like this. Instead, I want to return true or false depending on whether the user is authenticated or not. And we have that information in the auth service, here with user is authenticated. Now, thankfully, we can inject services into services. So by adding a constructor to the auth guard, we can inject the auth service into the auth guard. So auth service like this. Make sure to add the import here at the top. And then here, you can return the result of this auth service user is authenticated, because this will be a Boolean. Of course, if the user is not authenticated, I want to not just block the navigation, I want to provide an alternative instead. And for this, we can manually redirect the user. So here we can inject our router, and I will check if this auth service user is authenticated. If this is not true, hence the exclamation mark here, if this is not true, then I want to use my router and navigate to /auth, to the auth page where the user can log in. And that should be navigated by URL, therefore. So now we can go to /auth if the user is not authenticated. And this code will then still execute, and it will return false to prevent the original navigation we wanted to do. Otherwise, if the user is authenticated, this code will never run, and here this will return true, so we may continue. Now we just need to attach the guard. And I want to attach the guard to my app component, to my app routing module, to the places and bookings routes. You attach a guard by adding the name of the guard, something like can activate, or in this case, can load here. And then this takes an array, because you can add multiple guard services for one and the same type of guard. Here I only have one though, and this will be my auth guard. You need to import auth guard from your auth folder, and there the auth guard file. And then, well, this is all you need to add. And the same, of course, for bookings. So here I'll also add can load and add my auth guard here as a can load guard. Now these routes are protected. And that also is then true for all their child routes. So if the page now reloads and user is authenticated is set to false by default, we indeed end up here on the login page. Now logging in doesn't help, because if you click this, it will be set to true, but as you reload your page, this state will be lost, so it's back to false again. Of course, when logging in, I want to navigate though. I want to go to another page, and therefore here on the auth page, in on login, I want to navigate, so I'll inject my router here from @Angular router. This import needs to be added at the top of your page. And then in on login, there I will call this router navigate, and I want to go to, I can navigate by URL actually. I want to go to /places tabs discover, let's say. Now the route guard will of course still protect this route, but now that we do log in, we are actually authenticated, so we'll be able to make it through the guard. So if I hit log in there, here we are, and I can now use this app as before. But if I reload, we lose that state, we're back to false, and therefore we're back to the authenticate page. Now, one thing I of course want to add is the logout button. We do have it here in the app component HTML file. We trigger on logout when we click it, and in on logout, I now want to use the logout method from the auth service. So let's inject the auth service here in the app component. And for that, you need to add the import to auth service to that auth service file. And then in on logout, we can call this auth service logout. And now with that, if this reloads and I do log in, I can log out, but we're not redirected. Well, we can see that we succeeded if we now try to go to your bookings, because this tries to load a page that is protected by a guard, and since I logged out and user is authenticated, therefore was reset to false, we fail. But obviously I want to redirect right when I click log out here. Now for that, we just have to inject the router again into the app component here. So private router like this. Of course, imported from @Angular router. And then when on logout is triggered, I will call this router navigate by URL auth. This means that now with that, this page will reload. I'm logged out by default. If I log in and I now press logout, I'm redirected. And I can log in again, of course. So this is how we can add an auth guard and how we can use that default Angular feature in an Ionic Angular app as well.